In Siberia, scientists thawed a chunk of meat over 30,000 years old, and their sled dogs ate it without complaint. That meat came from an animal whose tusks are still legally sold as ivory today because it has been extinct long enough that the law does not apply, and whose entire genome scientists have already read. A Texas laboratory is now racing to bring it back to life. Its name is the woolly mammoth, and this is its story. The woolly mammoth belongs to the genus Mammoths, in the same family as living elephants, and its closest relative alive today is the Asian elephant. Its full scientific name is Mammothus primigenius, and it did not appear out of nowhere. It evolved from an earlier giant called the steppe mammoth in Siberia, and it gradually spread west into Europe, replacing its ancestor there and east across the Bering Land Bridge into North America once falling sea levels exposed the crossing between the two continents. Mammothus primigenius existed roughly from 600,000 years ago until the very last individuals disappeared around 4,000 years ago. For most of that span, its range stretched from what is now Spain all the way to Alaska, making it one of the most widespread large mammals of any kind that has ever lived on this planet. For centuries, Siberian hunters pulled mammoth tusks out of the frozen ground and had no real explanation beyond folklore. That changed in 1796 when the French naturalist Georges Cuvier examined mammoth bones and made a claim that unsettled the scientific world of his time. This animal was not a strange elephant that had wandered north. It no longer existed anywhere on Earth. At the time, the very idea that a species could vanish completely was controversial. Most naturalists assumed an all-knowing creator would not allow any of his creatures to disappear. 3 years after Cuvier's claim, the German anatomist Johann Friedrich Blumenbach gave the animal a formal name, Elephas primigenius, meaning the firstborn elephant. The genus name Mammothus followed decades afterward. The most famous early specimen came from a Siberian hunter named Osip Shumakhov, who spotted a frozen carcass emerging from a riverbank in 1799 and watched it for years as the ice slowly released it. By 1806, the naturalist Johann Friedrich Adams had excavated what became known as the Adams mammoth, one of the first mummified mammoths ever brought back for scientific study. The word mammoth itself likely comes from an old Siberian word for a creature believed to burrow underground, which explained to early hunters why they kept finding its remains beneath the earth rather than on top of it. That word entered European languages in the early 1600s, long before anyone understood what they were actually describing. What makes Mammothus primigenius remarkable is not just its size, but its staying power. It survived ice age after ice age, adapting its fur, its fat, and its behavior to a changing planet for more than 500,000 years. And yet, the very thing that makes its story so compelling is how it ended. Not gradually across the whole planet at once, but in one final act on a remote island that scientists are still piecing together. Most extinct animals are known only from bones, but Mammothus primigenius is different. Because so many carcasses froze solid in Siberian permafrost, scientists have recovered entire mammoths with skin, hair, muscle, and even stomach content still intact. One calf, nicknamed Lyuba, was so well preserved that researchers could examine the milk still curdled in her stomach from her final feeding. Another calf, Yuka, still had patches of reddish-brown fur and soft tissue attached to her skull, along with a broken hind leg that some researchers believe came from an attack, possibly by a cave lion or even a person before the young animal died. These frozen bodies mean paleontologists are not just guessing at what a woolly mammoth looked like, they have genuinely seen it down to individual strands of hair. An adult male stood roughly 3.4 meters, or 11 feet, tall at the shoulder, and could weigh as much as 6,000 kilograms, or more than 13,000 pounds. That put it in the same size range as a modern African elephant, close enough that from a distance the two animals would be genuinely hard to tell apart if it were not for the coat. The animal's defining feature was not any single body part, but an entire cold weather survival system layered onto an elephant's frame. Beneath a coarse outer coat of hair as long as 50 centimeters or nearly 20 inches sat a dense, insulating undercoat, and beneath that, a layer of fat up to 8 centimeters or roughly 3 inches thick. Its ears were small compared to a modern elephant's, and its tail was short, both adaptations that reduced the surface area exposed to Arctic cold and cut down on heat loss. On its back sat a distinctive hump, a store of fat the animal could draw on when food was scarce in the depths of winter, giving many woolly mammoths a sloping silhouette quite different from a modern elephant's flatter back. Even its skin was different, thicker and more elastic than an elephant's, built to trap heat rather than release it, and its coat ranged from light blonde to a deep, almost black brown, likely varying between individuals the same way hair color does in people. The trunk held a secret modern elephant's share only partly. Unlike an arm, it had no bones at all, just tens of thousands of individual muscles working together, and at its very tip, Mammothus primigenius had two small, finger-like projections it could use to pick up something as delicate as a single blade of grass. Its curved tusks, some growing past 4 meters or 13 feet along the outer curve in old males, were used for digging through snow to reach buried vegetation, and occasionally for combat between rival males. Inside its jaw, only one enormous ridged molar sat in use at a time on each side, replaced by a fresh tooth pushing in from behind as the old one wore down. Over a full lifetime, a mammoth would wear through 6 of these molar sets, and once the final set was gone, there was nothing left to replace it. Broad, cushioned feet spread its enormous weight across snow, and soft tundra ground the way snowshoes work for a person, keeping it from sinking into terrain that would trap a lighter but less well-adapted animal. Picture the mammoth steppe not as a frozen wasteland, but as one of the largest ecosystems that has ever existed, a dry, grassy plain wider than any grassland on Earth today. It was crowded with life. Woolly rhinoceroses grazed alongside herds of horses and steppe bison. Saiga, antelope moved in fast, nervous groups across the open plain, and cave lions stalked the ground looking for anything slow enough to catch, while wolves and scavenging birds followed behind, waiting for whatever the larger predators left. Mammothus primigenius was by far the largest animal walking that world. Its diet was almost entirely grass, sedges, and other low tundra plants gathered from the open steppe, and an adult needed a staggering amount of it, an estimated 200 kilograms or 440 pounds of vegetation every single day. To meet that demand, a mammoth spent most of its waking hours grazing, using its trunk to gather bundles of grass and its tusks to sweep snow aside in winter and expose the plants underneath. It was not a picky eater. When its preferred grasses were scarce, it turned to shrubs, moss, and even bark stripped straight from trees, exactly the kind of tooth wear and stomach content evidence that has survived in frozen specimens alongside preserved dung that still shows which plants a particular animal ate in its final days. Chemical traces locked inside fossil tusks can even reveal the seasonal routes a mammoth walked between summer and winter grazing grounds, laid down year by year like the rings of a tree. Like modern elephants, woolly mammoths appear to have lived in herds led by an older female, with young males eventually striking out on their own, a pattern inferred from bone bed sites where multiple generations were found buried together. A full-grown adult had little to fear from any predator. Its size alone was defense enough. But calves separated from the herd were vulnerable to cave lions, and it is likely early humans took the same opportunity when they could. Their constant grazing and trampling did something the ecosystem depended on. It kept the ground open and grassy instead of letting it revert to moss and shrub, and it compacted snow that would otherwise insulate the frozen ground beneath. In a very real sense, the mammoth steppe needed the mammoth to remain the mammoth steppe. That relationship is the thread that leads directly into how this animal and the entire world it helped build eventually came apart. The disappearance of Mammothus primigenius did not happen quickly, and it did not happen to this animal alone. As the last ice age ended and the planet warmed, The open mammoth steppe that had supported the species for hundreds of thousands of years broke apart into forest, bog, and shrub tundra, habitat that could no longer feed an animal built for grazing on open grassland. Woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, and much of the wider steppe community disappeared in that same window. Evidence this was the collapse of an entire ecosystem, not the loss of one species in isolation. Most mainland mammoth populations across Europe, Asia, and North America were gone within a few thousand years of that shift. But not every population vanished at the same time. Small groups survived in isolated refuges long after their mainland relatives were gone. On St. Paul Island, off Alaska, until around 5,600 years ago, and on Wrangel Island off Siberia until roughly 4,000 years ago, meaning the very last woolly mammoths on Earth were still alive while the Great Pyramid of Giza was already standing. Exactly what finished off those final holdouts is still debated, and the honest answer is that no single cause explains all of it. Climate change clearly did the initial damage, fragmenting the mammoth steppe and cutting populations off from one another. In some regions, human hunters added direct pressure, and butchered mammoth remains found alongside stone tools in places as far apart as Siberia and North America confirm people were killing mammoths when the opportunity arose. On Wrangel Island specifically, genetic studies of the isolated population found a sharp loss of genetic diversity after it became cut off from the mainland, the kind of inbreeding that can weaken a population's ability to fight disease, and some researchers have also pointed to weathering of the island's rock reducing access to fresh water. Yet more recent genome analysis suggests that population had actually stabilized for thousands of years afterward, which points other researchers toward a sudden event rather than a slow genetic decline, possibly a harsh winter that iced over the ground and left the herd unable to reach food, a phenomenon that has killed large numbers of Arctic grazers in modern times. Somewhere on that remote island in a landscape already emptied of every other mammoth on the planet, the last members of a species that had endured 500,000 years and outlasted ice age after ice age finally ran out of time. There was no dramatic final stand and no last survivor anyone recorded. The mammoth steppe had already become tundra and forest around them. One difficult season, the herd that had held on the longest simply did not make it through, and an animal that had once ranged across most of the northern hemisphere was gone. Now for my favorite part, a few fun facts your friends probably don't know. Thomas Jefferson was so convinced woolly mammoths might still be alive somewhere in the unexplored American interior that he asked Lewis and Clark to keep an eye out for one during their expedition west. A woolly mammoth could live to around 60 years old, roughly the same natural lifespan as a modern elephant, and scientists can now read its exact age and sometimes even clues about its final days. From growth, rings inside its tusks, the same way you would count rings in a tree stump. Ice Age humans across Europe were clearly fascinated by this animal too, and a single cave in France, now nicknamed the Cave of 100 Mammoths, contains more than 150 separate paintings and engravings of woolly mammoths carved and painted onto its walls. In 2015, researchers finally published the complete genetic code of Mammothus primigenius, and because the species has been extinct so long, its fossil ivory is exempt from modern ivory trade bans, meaning tens of thousands of ancient tusks are still legally pulled from the Siberian permafrost and sold every year. But the strangest fact might be this one. At a laboratory in Dallas, Texas, a company called Colossal Biosciences has already produced mice with thick, golden, mammoth-style coats as a genetic proof of concept, and it is now aiming to produce an actual mammoth-like calf, born to an Asian elephant surrogate, by 2028. What stays with me about the woolly mammoth is how personal its extinction feels compared to almost any other animal from deep time. We are not just looking at bones and making guesses, we know what one calf ate in her final hours. We know the color of its coat, and that closeness turns this from a distant fact into something that genuinely feels like a loss, not just a line in a textbook. If you have a favorite extinct animal you would like Dino to cover next, leave it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed learning about the woolly mammoth, hit like and subscribe so more people can meet it too. See you in the next one. And until then, stay curious. Thanks for watching. Watch this video next and subscribe for more.